Hey you guys, so today's conversation is about how stress and big emotions can potentially influence your menstrual cycle. And I did a live on this a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't able to save it, so I've been promising that I would re-record this conversation because I think it's so important for what so many of us are experiencing right now. With everything that's going on, a whole lot of unknowns happening in the world right now. Many women that I'm speaking to are experiencing a lot of big emotions, a lot of unusual levels of stress, and it's really important to me that you guys understand how this could potentially influence your menstrual cycle so that if something a little unusual is going on, you're not freaking out about it. You understand a bit about what's happening in your body. So you may or may not know, but your menstrual cycle is a feedback system. So it's not this static rhythm that's just going to be, beautifully healthy and flowing no matter what's going on. It's responding to a lot of different factors. The food that you're putting in your body, the quality of sleep, your emotional well-being, your stress being a huge one. And so when things are a little off balance in your life, your menstrual cycle can be affected in a few different ways. And I know that my cycle personally has been a little off in the last few weeks, and I'll dive a little more into that in a minute. But many women who I'm speaking to, clients, friends, messages that I'm getting from people on Instagram are indicating to me that a lot of women are experiencing unusual menstrual cycles at the moment. And I imagine that's largely in part to the levels of stress and the big emotions and everything that's kind of swirling for all of us right now. So for me personally, my cycle has definitely been a little off kilter in the last month or so. And what that's looked like for me personally, and I'll go into some more specifics of things you could maybe expect in a moment, but what it's looked like for me personally is I ovulated late last month, which meant that my cycle was delayed. It was about 35 days instead of my usual 31 to 32, right in the middle of, between ovulation and my period. So for me, that was around day 23, 24 of my cycle. My womb was talking to me a lot, and it wasn't like period cramps. It was just sensation. Like my womb was really asking me to tune in and listen. And I actually, around that time in my cycle, released a clot, which was really unusual for me, especially nowhere near my period. And when I tuned in, that was my body releasing some fear. So that morning I'd woken up with a lot of emotion around everything that was occurring. This was about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I did some somatic practices to release some fear. And literally an hour or so later, my body released that clot. So my period arrived when I expected it, but a couple of days later than it usually would. And it was, all good for the first few days as usual. I didn't have any unusual cramps. My blood was this beautiful bright red crimson color that it is when it's really healthy. And then on day 3 of my cycle, all of a sudden I was just floored by the stabbing pain. And when I say floored, I mean I literally had to stop what I was doing and lie on the floor for about 20 minutes. And when that pain passed, I went to the bathroom to empty my menstrual cup, and my body had released I want to say 100 of these tiny little clots and one quite big one. And it was so weird. It was the few days leading up to that, totally normal. In that 20 minutes, my body just purged all of this stuff. And then in the days after, my period went back to normal. And when I tuned into what that was, it was my body releasing fear and anger and grief around everything that was going on. So what happens to me when something unusual is going on with my cycle is I'll literally place my hands on my belly and talk to my womb and say, what is that? What are you releasing? What do you need from me? Or if it's cramps, what is it that you need right now? What are you trying to tell me with these cramps? Because our bodies are always talking to us. And, other women I've spoken to have had different experiences, similar delayed ovulation, a longer cycle. Some women have started bleeding earlier. A lot of women are experiencing unusual levels of premenstrual symptoms, so really bad cramps, really heightened emotions. Everything just feels heightened and exacerbated and more intense. And women who don't usually experience any of these symptoms, who usually have really healthy, thriving cycles, are noticing that things are off. And so I want to speak to the reasons why some of these things may be happening. So the first thing to know is that stress can influence your cycle in a couple of different ways. If you are feeling quite stressed in the first half of your cycle or the lead up to ovulation, that can delay or prevent ovulation. And as I said, that's because your body, when your body is in fight or flight and it's really stressed and it's focused on being in survival mode, it's not going to release an egg. It doesn't think it's safe to make a baby. And when we think about it that way, it just reminds us how intelligent our bodies really are. So you may notice if you're really stressed, and this, when I talk about stress, there are different kinds of stress. There's like a one-time stressful event. So for me, one time my husband had a seizure and ended up in hospital, and it was a couple of days before ovulation, and that knocked my ovulation off by a few days because my body went into that panic mode, and he was totally fine, by the way. Other times, I've noticed my ovulation can be delayed a little bit if I just overwhelm myself with commitments. And it's not even necessarily that I'm particularly stressed about anything. It's just that my body is in that state of hyper awareness because I've given it so much to think about and so much to do. And it could be, I've taken on too many projects at work. And even though I love my work, my body identifies that as stress. Stress could be travel, jumping on a plane, or going traveling. It often disrupts our menstrual cycles. If your sleep is off, if you're feeling tension in your relationship, so many different things, whether they are kind of that long-term underlying stress or that more acute, like a one-time stressful situation, anything your body interprets as stress has the potential to disrupt your menstrual cycle. So that's worth knowing, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. So as I said, that could delay ovulation. Your body may try to ovulate a couple of times before it succeeds. And in that case, it can feel like a bit of a hormonal roller coaster because your hormones are sort of going up and down as your body tries to ovulate and then doesn't, and then tries to ovulate and then doesn't. And it can feel like you're flipping between that really beautiful heightened energy of your inner summer and that more turbulent energy of your inner autumn or your premenstrual phase, and it's sort of this back and forth. And it's something I know well because I used to have a lot of trouble with ovulation in the years after coming off the pill when my body was re-regulating its own rhythm. And it feels like a big hormonal roller coaster. And when I understood what was happening, all of a sudden the way that I was feeling made so much more sense. And that's really my intention with this video, is to let you know some of, why what you're experiencing could be happening, so that you're aware, so that you don't feel like something's wrong, so that you're not worried about what's going on in your body, so that you know what to expect, and then maybe know some ways to help support your body through it. So when ovulation is delayed, that then means that your period will be delayed. So the luteal phase of your cycle, which is between ovulation and your period, is always going to be between 11 to 16 days if your cycle is healthy. And for most women, in my experience, that the number of days between ovulation and your period doesn't really deviate a whole lot. Like for me, it's pretty much always 14 days on the dot. So because I knew that my ovulation was delayed, I then knew my period would come about 14 days after that, which was on day 35. So my cycle was 35 days rather than my usual 32, 33, which is a normal cycle for me personally. And so if you know that your ovulation is delayed, or you know that there's the potential because you've been feeling really stressed for ovulation to be delayed, and for those of you asking, how do I track my ovulation? Look into the fertility awareness method, which is taking your temperature and tracking your cervical fluid. That's how you pinpoint ovulation. That's the method that I personally use. So if you know that your ovulation has the potential to be delayed, then you aren't going to be freaking out if your period is a couple of days late, which it's not actually late, it's your ovulation that was late, but that would mean that your period would come later than you would have expected it to. So that's something to be mindful of, because you don't want to be stressing out thinking, gosh, my period was due today and it hasn't come, like, could I be pregnant? Is there something wrong? If you understand, as I said, what's going on with your body, it takes away the fear, it takes away that unknown, and it brings you back to that place of, oh, my body's just responding to stress. It's trying to keep me safe. It's trying to focus its energy on, my survival, like being able to digest my food, being able to breathe properly, all of those things that are required for us to survive in periods of high stress. And making a baby isn't its priority right now, and that's why my cycle is a little off. And I get to allow space for that, and I get to be extra gentle with myself, and that's okay, because it is okay. And this is not a video of like how to fix it so your cycle is always perfect. It's a video around understanding how your body can respond to emotions and stress so that you are informed, so that you're empowered, so that you can make choices to meet whatever is present in your life right now. So that's one way that stress can affect your cycle, delaying ovulation, which will also mean that your period is delayed because it's kind of a flow-on effect, as I said. If you're more stressed in the second half of your cycle, or also if ovulation is delayed, the flow-on effect of that is that your premenstrual symptoms will probably be heightened. So things like breakouts, cramps, breast tenderness, spotting, achy hips and pelvis, all of those premenstrual symptoms that we're all really familiar with. You may find yourself experiencing those if you don't usually, and if you do usually, then they may be heightened. And again, this is your body's response to stress, because stress disrupts your HPA axis and the way that your body, produces different hormones at different times. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it sort of throws everything off balance. And as I said, your body's sort of scrambling to prioritize the functions that you actually need to survive, and so your reproductive system isn't one of those, and so things can be a little off. So that's sort of the more scientific component of how stress can affect your cycle. And then in the emotional component, as I've spoken about many times before, your womb is this it's the home of your creative energy. Your pelvic bowl is the root place of your sacred essence as a woman, and the womb and the pelvic bowl are also the emotional junk drawer of the body. So any emotions we don't express, any emotions that we don't feel fully and release out, if we think of them as having an energetic presence, which they do, all of that energy is sort of getting shoved down into the womb and the pelvic bowl area. And when we're experiencing that dense emotional energy taking up space in our womb around our pelvic bowl, whether that's fear, anger, grief, sadness, truths that we haven't spoken out with, that we've kind of shoved down and just left to simmer there, that stagnant, dense energy, which is the opposite from that flow that we're wanting, can manifest as symptoms like period pain, longer cycles, clots, your blood being like a darker brown color than that, rather than that beautiful crimson color that we're wanting, which are all things that we ideally don't want, but again, just knowing that that's something that can happen. And in my experience, to put it super simply, because this could be a whole conversation, the way that your emotions can affect your cycle really drastically kind of goes one of two ways. If you're holding on a lot, your womb is also going to hold on, and that can delay your cycle or exacerbate those premenstrual symptoms. If you have a big emotional release, sometimes your period can come earlier than expected. For myself and for so many of my clients who have done, somatic practices like primal screaming, breath work, especially if it's a deep dive in like a workshop setting, we so often find that we bleed early because our body is physically releasing what we have emotionally and energetically released. Because again, our bodies are so intelligent, and our emotion, like the emotional and energetic side of our well-being, influences our cycles just as deeply as food and sleep and hormones and all of those really physical factors. So those are just some of the ways that stress and big emotions can potentially impact your cycle. I could talk about this for ages. It could be a huge conversation, but I just really wanted to give you a taster today, so that if you are experiencing big emotions or unusual levels of stress, which to be honest, pretty much everyone I know is, you just have an awareness of how your body could be responding to that, and that awareness allows you to be more accepting of your body, to understand why your body's reacting the way that it is, and to be therefore kinder and more loving toward yourself, because we're so quick as women to judge ourselves, to label our bodies as wrong, to feel like our bodies are betraying us, but really our bodies are super intelligent, and they're just doing what they think they need to do to keep us safe and to keep us alive. So I would love to hear from you if you're watching this and you've been noticing unusual things about your cycle, delayed ovulation, a longer cycle, a shorter cycle, different symptoms than you would usually experience. Please pop a comment or send me a message. I'd love to hear what's going on for you guys right now, so that I can create resources that will support you. And I hope you learned something from this video. I hope it supported you to be more loving toward yourself, to understand your body and your cycle a little more deeply, and know that I'm sending you love and that we are all in this together.